You. Hi, folks. Mark Daniels here. Um, make your meetings matter. The 7 P's of productive meetings. Hey, I don't know about you, but I've had a love-hate relationship with meetings for many years. Um, and early in my career, I used to run meetings, and I was I owned the first company I ran, um, and I was the owner and founder of a company called Computer Discount of America. And I really didn't know what I was doing back then. I was a young whippersnapper, blessed to be in the computer industry in the late 70s and into the 80s and 90s. Um, and but I was what they call the hippo in the room, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the hippo in the room was. So I didn't really use meetings as effectively as I should have. I did get several things right back then, but over the years I've learned a lot about how to run effective meetings and how powerful they can be, and how they can really be a game changer in driving the execution of your strategic plan forward. So make your meetings matter. I hope to show you that, whether your meetings are being held online, whether your meetings are being held in person, or a combination thereof. Um, we will be we'll be um, we'll be covering that. And anything I teach today will be able to be applied to that. Um, so. Um, I always like it. One of the things I'm going to talk about is the need for an agenda. And if you look at the blue boxes along the bottom edge, that's effectively our agenda today. Our purpose, people, preparation, protocols, process, participation, progress. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about a review of those at the end, and also share with you a little bit about a piece of software that we have built into our application, into the Results BI application. I'm sorry, I drifted out of the screenshot there. Um, so let's get going. I probably only have to carve out about 30 minutes for this today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat area. We probably should have a few minutes at the end. Today, so many of our meetings are being done online and electronically. Of course, that was driven heavily by, it was already in play, but driven heavily by COVID. And I cannot tell you, excluding my meetings, I can't tell you the last Zoom or online meeting that I went to where the leader of that meeting at the beginning showed an agenda. And that's really foolish. Okay. So, but before we get into the agenda component, every meeting has to have a purpose. Oprah Winfrey would come into every room, and she still does to this day, with a statement something like this: why are we here? She wants to know exactly what the meeting's going to be about. Or another thing that she's been quoted as saying, what is our intention for this meeting? And she'll do this even when she's working with somebody else, maybe going to be doing um, um, a guest appearance on something. She'll say, um, what do you want to talk about? She always wants to know exactly what the purpose of this meeting is. So every meeting should have a clearly defined purpose. If you don't have a clearly defined purpose, and you're just meeting for the sake of meeting, oh, we always meet on Mondays. Um, so it's so important to have a clearly defined purpose. The next of the 7 P's, and I call these the 7 P's. In my previous book, I called it the 5 P's, but now I call it the 7 P's because I've added I added 2 additional components to it, and I'll tell you which ones they were when we get to them. Actually, I'm on one right now. The people. Do you have the right people at the meeting? What people are you inviting? There's a typo there. Understand the cost of the meeting. I was once at a meeting with one of my mentors. His name was Bob Trenkamp. I'll mention him a few times during this session. Um, Bob was a mentor of mine in 1991. Um, I learned a lot from him, and I'll always hold him dear in my heart for the many things I learned from him. But we once were, the meeting had ended. And he asked me to stay after the meeting to just to iron out some things that we had covered and make sure that the proper tasks were assigned, follow-up tasks were assigned after that meeting. But he said, whoa, that meeting was expensive. And I said, really? He said, yeah, well, if you look at the average salary, we had, 11 people here, and I don't know if they all had to be here. And the average salary of those people were X per hour, and that was a $3,000 meeting. So um, understand the cost of the meeting. You are taking people away from their valuable job that they do for your company, for what you pay them to do. You're taking them off the front line, away from their desk, off the phones, off the floor of the store, um, out of the office, so to speak. Um, you know, understand, the cost of the meeting, and make sure they really need to be there. Um, I'll tell you another story. I'm filled with stories. I worked in the early 2000s, 2001 to 2003, for a company called Flextronics, multi-billion-dollar company. I was the chief operating officer of one of the divisions, and I had asked to meet with the CEO. I had never met him, but yet I was a chief operating officer of a division, and the company Flextronics, their headquarters was based in San Jose, California, big corporate structure. Um, and I went in to meet with the CEO and got 15 minutes on his calendar. And he said, so you're Mark Daniels. I've heard a lot of good things about you. And the meeting went forward a little bit more. And then he said, so how are things going for you? You know, I told him what was going well for me. And then he said, what's not going well for you? I said, well, honestly, Michael, his name is Michael Marks. And honestly, Michael, I said, I'm invited to way too many meetings, and they're meetings that I don't need to be at. And they're a colossal waste of the time, because, some of these meetings don't have agendas. Some of these meetings, there's a hippo in the room. He knew what a hippo in the room was, and I'll share that with you. Um, the um, um, the leader of the meeting does all the talking, doesn't ask for any input. There's not a clear, defined list of what needs to be done after the meeting. So he turned to me and he said, fix it. He said, first off, stop going to meetings you think you shouldn't be at. So I did that. If I was invited to a meeting and I was just going to get an update, I would say, send me an update email. I don't need to be at that meeting. I've attended that meeting once or twice before. It doesn't make sense. Just send me an update after the meeting as to anything that's pertinent to the division that I run, or anything that needs my attention. So right off the bat, I cleared like 1/3 of my meetings off my calendar. So, invite the right people, and make sure they're needed there. It should be people that, a meeting should be where the people there need each other together to accomplish more. If this is a meeting that can be done where things can be pushed via email or text message, do it that way. But don't bring people together in a room, unless there's power in those people working together, rolling up their sleeves and working together and having a dialogue together. Yeah, bullet point there, email updates. If there's a meeting where it's just an update meeting, cancel the meeting. Just send a weekly update, right? So very key. The next P is preparation. So we've gone through purpose. Every meeting has to have a purpose. You have to invite the right people. The next thing is preparation. You have to come prepared to a meeting. Review the agenda before the meeting. And this is true of Zoom meetings. People are always rushing into a Zoom meeting. They come and they don't have any data to share. Even early on when I was running Computer Discount of America in the 80s, um, I had a dashboard. It was actually a whiteboard and it hung on the wall in my office and it had all the numbers from yesterday's sales, yesterday's phone calls, yesterday's number of returns, the backlog, the accounts payable, the accounts receivable. You could look at this dashboard on my wall, which is really just a whiteboard because it was before fancy electronic dashboards. Um, but every meeting should have data, right? So if an attendee's coming to talk about something, they should come with a handout or they should come with the information that's needed to run this meeting effectively. Can't tell you how many sales meetings I've been in where the head of the sales department says, oh, you can't trust those numbers because the sales reps never key in their phone calls. You got to fix that problem, right? So preparation is key. Make sure your data is accurate. If you're using a dashboard, if you can bring a dashboard into the meeting, display it in the meeting, then you should have that. You can't display the data in the meeting. You should bring it printed so you can refer to it. Again, I'm going to tell you another Bob Trencamp story. I told you already. I saw a few people signed in a few minutes late, but Bob was a mentor of mine in the 90s, from 91 to 97. I worked with him and we ended up growing a really large company, building on an $80 million a year company in New Jersey. But there was something I said at a meeting and I brought it up and it was very controversial. I remember that. I forget exactly what it was, but a lot of people like rolled their eyes and, really? That's quite a statement that you made there, Daniels. And Bob turned to me, Bob Trencamp, the CEO of the company, and said, Mark, do you have the data to back that up? And I said, yeah, sure, I can run a report. He said, so you don't have it with you? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, next week we'll come back to this. Make sure you are prepared with the data. So make sure you have the data. Learned that from him some 40 years ago and still hold it close to my vest. And that goes true for an online meeting as well. If you have a spreadsheet, circulate it prior to the meeting. That's why I say look at the agenda. I'm just appalled how meetings have fallen apart now that they've all gone online. I don't see data being shared as much. I don't see agendas. I don't see clearly defined purposes for the meeting. I think when COVID started, it was really a way when people were working remotely to get people together and build that camaraderie that had to be maintained while we couldn't go into the office. But I think it also caused meetings to really fragment and fall apart. So we got to get back to some basics here. Protocols. Oh, you guys are going to hate this. So many people hate this. Another Bob Trencamp statement. He said, if you're not early, you are late. I came to a meeting about 5 minutes late once and the door was locked. And I had to knock on the door to get into the room. Bob unlocked the door and I came in. He said, you're late. You're not early. You're late. He said, I'll let you in this time, but next time I'm not letting you in. He would smile at me with a funny grin. And you might think this guy was a nutcase or harsh. But he was right. If you're not early, you're late. Can you imagine a chef at a restaurant showing up late to work? The kitchen opens at 5 o'clock. He's got to get there at 3 o'clock and start doing prep for the night. Actually, most major restaurants, they get in at 12 or 1 in the afternoon to do prep for the dinners. Can you imagine how poorly that restaurant would run? Can you imagine an airplane pilot has to get there 1 hour before the flight because he's got to do a check of the flight plan. He's got to, technically, they're supposed to walk around the outside of the plane. There's so many things. You got to check all the instruments. The safety tests have to be run. So can you imagine if your pilot was even 5 minutes late, it would delay departures for for an hour after the the plane got there. So this is true of business meetings too. And then think back to the cost of the meeting that we went through earlier. Let's say this meeting's costing you $1,000 or $2,000 for 1 hour meeting. If you have people that are showing up late to the meeting, they're spending the company's cash, right? No cell phones. This is true. I see a lot of people in Zoom meetings, and they'll pick up their phone, and they'll be looking at their phone, and they'll be getting text messages, and they'll be typing messages into the phone underneath the table. You might need to put a basket in the room. Really limit the amount of distractions that are there during a meeting. So really important to set some protocols and define it, so these meetings run efficiently and effectively. Don't be the hippo in the room. HIPPO stands for highly influential person presiding over the meeting. It's the hippo in the room. And typically it's the person that gets paid the most, or the person that's called the meeting, and they do all the talking. They're the hippo in the room. They're the big bully. And they don't mean to be that big bully, but that's what they are. They eat up all the time. They don't encourage open discussion. So don't be that person. Don't be that hippo in the room that is going to slow down the meeting or not let the people that are at the meeting speak. It's really, really important to have the input from the team. Why the heck are you having a meeting if you're just going to sit there and lecture them, right? So do not be the hippo, and don't let anybody else become the hippo in the room. A good way to avoid that is to appoint a moderator. I like agendas at the times down the side. I like to start a meeting at a certain time and end a meeting at a certain time. So it's really key that you have a moderator. The moderator will keep the meeting on track, say, hey, that's not on the agenda. We've gone off agenda here. Why don't we table that? We can add it to the agenda next week, or we can take that and talk about that offline. Or we've gone over on this topic. Does anybody else have anything of substance to add? We need to really move on and keep this meeting going. Remember, if your meeting goes too long and there's another meeting scheduled afterwards for somebody else that's in the room, they're going to be late to the next meeting, right? So you have to be respectful of everybody's time. Moderator versus a note taker. It used to be called the minutes, right? People would take the minutes of the meeting. I'm more interested in getting a list of tasks that have to be accomplished. Now you notice I listed that twice. So the note taker, okay, this was discussed and this was what we decided to do to fix it. Now, many of you have probably heard of EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. They're great, powerful system. A little too complex for some people because they actually want you to hire an integrator to integrate the system into your company, which is sometimes valuable in a medium to large size company. But I don't think a small company should have to hire an integrator to put in a piece of strategic planning software and execution software. So in EOS, they create a list of issues. I think that's an unnecessary step. If you identify an issue, create a task, which is a corrective action. Fix it right then and there. Let's not build a list that then we're going to work down the list. No, build a list of fixes, the tasks or things that need to happen to fix that issue. If you have a lot of issues, maybe you need an issue list. I do not typically recommend an issue list. I recommend a list of tasks that are going to fix the problem with the issue, okay? The issue at hand. So clearly defined protocols, politeness, no arguing, whatever it might be. Define your protocols for the meeting. The next P, process. Oh, you're going to hear me talk about Bob Camp again. So when I took over, when I was first hired by Verityper in 1991, um, I was there for about 2, 3 weeks, and Bob Camp said, "Hey, do you mind if I sit in on one of your meetings?" I said, "No, not at all, Bob. My next meeting is Monday morning at 10 a.m. With my staff." "Oh, great, I'll be there." Bob shows up early, of course, right? And nobody's there in the room yet. And he says, "So let me see the agenda." And I said, "Well, Bob, this is a standing meeting. I don't have an agenda." Well, Bob stood up and walked out of the room. He opens the door, leans his head back in. He says, "No agenda, no attenda." He would always smile. He'd wink, "But I'll be back next week. Make sure you have an agenda." Well, he was back next week, and I had an agenda. And honestly, since then, there's very few meetings of mine that you'll attend that do not have an agenda. I start most of my workshops, my webinars, my talks, um, guest speaking engagements. I typically start out with an agenda. This is what we're going to cover today. This is what's on the agenda for today. Um, so, productive meetings have a clearly defined process. It's defined by the agenda. No agenda, no attenda. Participation. That's an XP. E for participation. Productive meetings are characterized by participation of everyone present. Um, if you have a silent Sam or saying nothing Nancy, and I don't mean to insult you if your name's Sam or your name's Nancy. Um, I use them as an example, but if you have somebody that's doesn't comes to meetings and doesn't say anything, why are they at that meeting? That's the first question you have to ask them. Should they be at that meeting? Ask yourself. But if you really want them at that meeting and you think they're just not engaging themselves in the discussion, you need to ask a question like, "Hey Sam, what do you think about this? I see you've been a little bit quiet. What are your thoughts on this, Sam?" Or if you have that saying nothing, Nancy, um, "Nance, hey, really would love your input on this. This is your area, and your input's really important to me on this." You see, whether you're an executive or you're a manager just leading a meeting, or if you're the CEO of the company, it's your job to get everybody participating. They're not going to participate if you're being a hippo, that highly influential person, that gets everything out on the table, but doesn't listen to the staff, doesn't get the critical feedback from the staff. So don't be that hippo. Um, Progress. We have a piece of our software called integrated meetings. I know within a month whether a client is going to grow or not grow. Within a month of working with them, I pretty much have a 90% confidence rating that that client is going to grow or not going to grow. It is because if they're using our software, and they're using a tool called integrated meetings in our software, I know they're going to grow, because the meetings are where you drive the execution. You have your strategy that you put down at the beginning of the year, and you should be adjusting your strategy every quarter, but you have your strategic plan, and you have some projects that you're working that came out of your strategic planning session that you did maybe in October, November, December, before January started, before the new year started in January. You need to meet every week and drive the execution. The execution is best leveraged in meetings. You look at a project that's due to be completed by the end of June, and here we are on May 17th, and it's not even started. You have to challenge that person and say, hey, Jim, you said you could get this project done by the end of the quarter, but it's really behind. How can we help you? Notice what I just did there. How can we help you? Included the whole room, everybody at this meeting, into eliciting their help for Jim because his project's way behind. I also got his buy-in at the beginning of the quarter that he could get it accomplished this quarter. So that makes it really easy for me to challenge, because I said, Jim, you said at the beginning of the quarter, this project was going to be no problem, but our growth is dependent on this project. Weekly, whether you're a manager, whether you're heading a division, whether you're heading a department, whether you're the CEO of the company, meetings and tracking your progress on a weekly basis is the key to driving execution. How do you become a great execution leader? The best way to become an execution leader is once a week to listen to your staff, look at your projects, and see how you can help them. It's your job to remove roadblocks. It's your job to reallocate resources if needed, whether that resource is money, whether that resource is people. It's your job to ask them how you can help, to ask the team, how can we get this back on track? And then when you're done with the meeting, everybody should leave, another typo, leave that meeting knowing exactly what needs to happen next. My E has been sticking on my computer, so that's why there's an E missing in leave and an E missing in needs. So I'll go back and fix those. And execution is spelled wrong too. I flew through this earlier today, so I apologize. I've obviously talked about meetings a lot. I can talk very freely and comfortably about meetings. Why do I have a love-hate relationship with meetings? Because there are meetings that are just stupid. And it's typically because they're not following these 7 Ps. And I see more stupid meetings today than I ever have before. In 44 plus years of business, I am seeing some of the worst meetings I ever have, especially the ones on Zoom, because they're missing almost all these Ps. Some of them have 1 or 2. Using the 7 Ps will really create productive meetings for you. Meetings are going to help your company grow. When you leave that meeting, everybody should leave that meeting knowing exactly what they need to do next. So a recap of the 7 Ps. I told you this would be about 30 minutes. See, and I'm going to get you, we're going to open up for a brief Q&A, but I probably blocked out 45 minutes on your calendar for this. And really, really important when you go into a meeting with an agenda to really stick to the agenda and stick to the timeline so that whatever you have on your calendar is going to happen next accordingly. And if a meeting's running over, just say, listen, we're going to run over here. Can we connect later on in this week to handle this? Because this is something we have to discuss. If it's an emergency or crisis issue, find out if everybody is available to extend the meeting a half hour later, or find a time that they can meet later on in that day. But wherever possible, keep the meeting on time and on track. So 7 Ps. The first one's have a purpose. Purpose. Have the right people. Don't invite people that you don't really need there at the meeting. These should be people that can accomplish more when working together. Make sure they're walking in prepared with data, up-to-date data. I used to sometimes appoint a data cop. A data czar, whatever you want to call them, somebody that made sure that all the data in the platform was accurate prior to the meeting. There's more in times when dashboards had to be updated more manually. Now everything's pretty automated, so I typically know that the dashboard's accurate, at least up until yesterday, depending how rapidly the data is flowing in. If possible, bring dashboards into your meeting. So, you have the data. Be prepared with data. Have protocols in place. Have some rules. Folks, you need to have rules for meetings. What's it called? Robin's rules, right? Um, a book that's probably up there on my top shelf where the old college books are. Um, so make sure you have protocols and stick to them, and maybe read them at the beginning of a meeting, every other meeting, just to say, hey, just want to point out that we've agreed, unless your wife is in labor, or you know you need to keep your cell phone live for some reason, but for a family reason, we've agreed that these phones are off and that we're not going to use them during this meeting. You have to review your protocols. Process, please, please, please. An agenda is so key. Encourage everybody's participation, and then you check the progress. So that's your chance to fix it when you're going through those progress meetings, or checking in with how projects are moving forward. Make sure you're really looking at the progress, and then it says fix. Always ask them how you can help. What can we do to help you? What can the company do to help you? Could I give you an extra resource? What needs to be done? If you think the project's really behind, you might want to pull that person aside and meet with them one-on-one after the meeting, but it's your chance to fix it. Okay. I will be sending you a write-up, just a 8.5 by 11 two-sided document that has these 7 Ps. We also have a tool called Integrated Meetings. It's built into the Results platform. I'll also send you a link to scheduling a demonstration with me if you'd like to see integrated meetings working in live, and how we apply everything I've taught you into a simple meeting template, and show you results where you can put together your strategic plan, and also the many tools that we have to help you execute your plan. Because while planning is important, the millions are in the execution of the plan. So that's why the results software is pretty cool. I'm going to send you a link so you can schedule a demonstration with me if you're so interested. Integrated meetings is what I'll show you. One of the things I'll show you during that demo. So anyway, any questions? Let me just see where you can type them into the chat. You can type them into the Q&A. I'll keep an eye open for a few minutes there. I want to thank you all for attending. It's been my honor. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you picked up a tidbit of information about how to make your meetings matter. Again, I want to thank you. I'm just looking to see. I don't have any questions coming up in the chat, and nothing in the Q&A. So that's it, guys. We're gonna close out for today. Thank you again for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at another one of my workshops, master classes, or webinars in the near future. Hey, thank you so much. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.